Hello tanks and tankheads, and welcome to a view replay featuring a tank I have definitely had on the channel before, but not since it came out, I think, the STG. Now you might more know this as the STG Guard, but this is Haidang 210 on the Asia server, where they at least apparently got to have just the non-guard skinned version, and I don't know if that was true for all servers, and frankly it seems an unimportant enough detail not to bother looking up. I did definitely get some things wrong when I first looked at this machine, which was again another view replay because I do not have it myself, which is possibly why I got it a bit wrong. It's always easier to judge these things when you have played them yourself, but when you're just looking at a page full of stats, it can be easy to miss important things. I went on about the gun, which is pretty good apart from its lowish DPM, but what I didn't really account for, which we've seen a bit of just there, is that this is a sluggish machine. It has a pretty weak engine for its tier, and so although the 50 kph isn't super slow or anything, it doesn't accelerate particularly well, and it doesn't go up slopes particularly well either. It's like a 400 horsepower engine, and it's not a super heavy tank or anything, but it definitely struggles a bit to get where it's going. Like I said though, the gun does have some nice advantages. It's 215, was it 215 or 212 average pen? It's something around that. 390 damage with a better aim time and handling than you would expect for being 390, but as I say, it's quite a long reload. It's like 14 seconds base, and so that definitely limits some of the usefulness. It also has limited gun depression, but it's not nearly as bad as the 416. In fact, it has like double the gun depression of the 416. Still only 6 degrees, and I don't know if that's all the way around, although I believe it is. Yes, tanks.gg says that is all around, but 6 degrees in this case is not quite enough for him to get a shot at anything that's cresting the hill on the other side. And if he fires at the stuff down by the railway tracks, he's going to get lit up pretty fast. The enemy team knows he's here though, and there is a risk the artillery might try and blind fire these bushes, but at the moment I presume they are firing at the middle instead, because they're going to be getting spotted from the flank of the hill. Neither team has a light tank, by the way. That is going to be particularly relevant to this replay, because we're going to spend large amounts of time with this, sitting in bushes, spotting. And I don't think it was Haidang's intent to sit and be a scout tank in this one. It just kind of worked out that way. And I think the view range is actually not that bad. Well, actually no, that's 370. That is kind of bad for being a tier 8 medium. Okay. That's another thing that's not very good, but presumably he's got some things that help his vision on this tank. It is low profile though, so I'm guessing it's also got decent camo. But yeah, 370 base view range, that's actually not at all good. So far, he hasn't dared open fire once. He would die pretty quickly. He really can't do much damage-wise from this position, so he's just sticking out and trying to spot for his allies. But unfortunately, they are able to use that other clump of bushes over there to spot his allies on the crest of this hill here. So, although he's picked up about 1,000 spotting so far, that's not a huge amount in the scheme of things. That's only 3 or 4 penetrating hits. This is a tier 9 game though, so although there are some nasty guns around, there aren't any tier 10 tanks. Although there are really some tier 10 guns. I mean, the T30 in particular, that's going to hit really very hard. The Object 257 also has a pretty big punch. Conqueror, of course, not so much the amount of health it can shave off, although it could still kill this theoretically in, what, 4 shots. But, of course, the gun handling is really very nice indeed. And then, of course, there's things like the Scorpion and even the T28 Prot. We get spotted briefly. Is a little slow to react. It goes to that dip where hopefully he won't be able to get hit, and ends up somewhat ungraciously sliding down. And instead of trying to climb all the way back up to the top of the hill again, well, he's going to instead go over to the other flank. It's probably around about now that I should say that I was extremely tempted to make this a replay where I sit and read some poetry or something. I was going to break out the William McGonagall, and I've done that in one previous video to some rather mixed reaction. Once upon a time it would have been reading the local newspaper, the Stornoway Gazette, but unfortunately the quality of that has gone really quite downhill compared to what it used to be. Just in terms of, you know, local amusing news stories, there's now a lot more syndicated content because it's owned by a publisher, a newspaper publisher that owns a lot of local papers in Scotland, and I think just across the UK. So it's gotten a lot more bland and a lot less local, unfortunately. So I was considering reading some William McGonagall and found one called An Address to Shakespeare, and then I read the first 2 lines, and I will in fact read you the first 2 lines because I couldn't get past them. Immortal William Shakespeare, there's none can you excel. You have drawn out your characters remarkably well. It's dreadful. It really is. It's one of the reasons why I went to McGonagall in the first place, because he's just one of the worst poets that has ever lived. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit and read through the whole thing. Just reading it to myself was bad enough. Sitting and reciting the whole thing out loud, no, I would not have managed it. So instead I'm just going to have to try and fill the time by other means. He got perilously close to being spotted there. That 54 mod 1 can't have been that far from the auto spotting range, which is what, I think, like 50 meters? I can't remember. I'm pretty rusty at my my stats for stuff like that. But yeah, it shows that he must have pretty good camo. Maybe he's even got camo on this crew, that he did not get spotted, and so he's basically being a light tank right now. He is trying to pick up stuff for his allies, but they have lost more tanks than the enemy team, so this is looking a little bit tricky, but it's not like the enemy team has enough of an advantage to massively just swamp them. But if this goes on for too much longer, if the enemy team are able to keep wearing away their hit points, then it will be a win. And so this is why, although this is an incredibly risky thing to do, I mean, we know the Scorpion's on the other side, but the T-30 might be here. With the big gun, that would really hurt. So although this is a massive risk, he's trying it anyway because there's no light tanks, and it's not like his armor's going to do him much good, because the armor on this is not good at all. It really isn't. You might think with the sloping and the rear-mounted turret that it might be at least semi-bouncy, but it's only really the front of the turret. The hull itself is very, very squashy indeed. It's not like it has massive numbers of hit points for this tier either. At least I don't think it does. Let me have a quick look at that. This is very professional of me doing this live. No, it's sort of on the low end. There are ones that have fewer hit points, but there are certainly ones that have a bit more. So, yeah, it's not really, you know, he doesn't want to rush forwards and take all of the hits. He can't do anything other than be cautious, but even being cautious here is a bit risky. But because there are no enemy light tanks, at least he knows there's not going to be anything with a massive view range spotting him, potentially. There could be one of the enemy mediums, of course, set up for high view range, but that hasn't happened so far. And if it hasn't happened yet, then chances are good it might not happen at all, but we'll see. He's still being extra cautious. He's pulling far back enough when he does fire that he's not going to get spotted. And because it's a 390 average damage gun, although his spotting damage by far outstrips his damage done is still not terrible. He's up to over 1,000 at this point. So with the TVP out the way and a reasonable handle on where the rest of the enemy tanks are, not all of them, but most of them, now he decides to press forward a bit, and again using the bushes, keeping quite close to the bushes and not venturing out into the open too far, and just counting on nothing having a particularly good view range. And there's another enemy tank spotted, the Oho, and this is the first anyone's seen them. Because he approached along that side, because there's this group of bushes between him and Oho, and indeed the Oho was behind bushes themselves, he was able to get to this position unspotted and is now again picking up spotting damage. And it must be awfully tempting to fire at this Oho, but it would be also awfully foolish to do so. So most of his enemy team, his enemy team, well done brain, most of his team is now in fact over on this flank, although they do still have two holding tight on the hill over on the far side. And that works out quite nicely for Haidang, because it means he's got most of the rest of his team's firepower now behind him. And so this Oho is screwed, and at that point he is much more free to move up, maybe spot artillery, maybe spot what is left of the enemy team, because of course there's bushes on both sides of this road, so that gives him a fair bit to work with. Unfortunately, he then finds the T-30, who was able to spot him and get a shot off, and that was most definitely the big gun. He does, however, step on the brakes quick enough there to, you know, he dukes out that he's moving forwards in a straight line, and artillery takes the bait, so artillery is at least reloading for a while. And the T-30 with that gun does also have a very long reload, so although another hit will kill him, unless he somehow got absurdly lucky, with the reload on that tank and the kind of sluggish reaction overall, he's now reasonably safe, especially as that T-30 has fired once again. Bounces a shot there for the Object 257, which was very lucky, but then gets smacked by artillery for almost as much. So if he hadn't bounced that shot somehow, I think that's the one shell he bounces, and I'm not even sure where that bounced, but yeah, that was a really inopportune time for the 257 to pop up. But at this stage, that guy is now screwed. He's just getting absolutely mobbed. And so it really is just a stroke of luck that Haidang is alive right now, but even if he'd died, him helping push this flank forwards and getting his team moving would have pretty much won the game anyway. Or would it? Because we're at the last 60 seconds. There's only 3 of them left, but they're absolutely going to have to get a move on to kill these last 3 enemy tanks. And so that one bounced shot might actually have become really, really important. Now, he can't get a shot on the T-44, who is there. Artillery, we don't know. They're presumably on the small island. Yep, there we go. They get spotted by the 25 AP, and he takes the shot. And someone else is going to get the T-44 with 25 seconds to spare. Now, because the T-25, not the T-25, the Batchat 25, T-25, I'm just, okay, well done, Brain. You're doing well today. Because that was there, the artillery would have died anyway. And so, yes, even if Haidang had died, they still would have won this one. But I'm sure he was quite pleased that he didn't die, because he ended that one with an ace tanker and a patrol duty with over 6,500 spotting damage and another nearly 2,500 damage of his own. That would be an impressive result in a light tank. In a medium tank with 370 meters base view range, that's even more impressive. But I think that is more to do with his camo value than the spotting range of his vehicle there. So that was a very close match. In fact, it was close in more ways than one. You might have been subjected to some McGonagall if I could have somehow managed to read my way all through one of his poems, but no, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it, so you've lucked out there, I think. But even so, even though I'm sure there will be one weird person out there that will be disappointed at the lack of McGonagall, hopefully you found this an entertaining match anyway, because it was a good match in an okay tank. And it was good not because of the gun, but because of the player. And his actions turning that into what was still a very close win, but a win nonetheless. So hopefully you found this interesting, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.